The Last Day of a Condemned Man, written by Victor Hugo. Chapter 1. Bystander. Condemned to die. For 5 weeks this thought has dwelt within me, and this alone, congealing my blood, bearing me down beneath its weight. Once, and it seems as if it were years and not weeks ago, I was like other men. Each day, each hour, each moment, was full. My mind was young and active, and it delighted in fancies. One after another they unrolled before me, and I saw the rough and scanty stuff of which life is made, with its embroidery of never-ending arabesques. There were young girls, fine copes belonging to bishops, battles won, theaters full of life and light, and then young girls again, and nocturnal promenades beneath the kindly arms of chestnut trees. My fancy always pictured fates. I could dream of what pleased me, for I was free then. Now I am a captive. My body is in chains, in a dungeon. My mind is imprisoned in an idea, a horrible, bloody, wild idea. I have but one thought, one conviction, one certainty. I am condemned to die. Whatever I do, this dread thought is ever with me, like a ghost at my side, alone and jealous, chasing away all other thoughts, face to face with my wretched self, and touching me with its icy hands when I turn away and close my eyes. It glides along every path where my soul would hide. It mingles like a frightful refrain with every word I hear. It clings to the hideous bars of my prison. It pursues me awake. It spies my troubled sleep, and creeps into my dreams under the form of a knife. I waken with a start, still pursued by it. I cry, "Ah, it is nothing but a dream!" But, scarcely are my heavy eyes half opened, before I see the dread thought written on the horrible reality which surrounds me, on the damp, close floor of my cell, in the pale rays of my night lamp, in the coarse wool of my garments, on the somber figure of the sentinel, with his cartridge box gleaming through the bars. It seems to me that even now, a voice whispers in my ear, "Condemned to die." Chapter 2. It was a beautiful morning in August. For 3 days my trial had been going on. For 3 days my name and my crime had called together a crowd of spectators, who swooped down upon the benches of the courtroom like so many crows around a corpse. For 3 days the phantasmagoria of judges, witnesses, lawyers, and public prosecutors had been coming and going before me, now grotesque, now bloody, but always dark and dreadful. The first 2 nights I had not been able to sleep from anxiety and fright, but weariness, physical and mental, brought me rest on the third. At midnight I had left the judges, who were to come to a decision. I was taken back to the straw of my dungeon, and I fell into a deep sleep, a sleep of forgetfulness. That was the first peaceful moment I had had for many a day. I was still sleeping soundly when they came to waken me. This time the heavy step and the iron shoes of the turnkey, the rattle of his bunch of keys, and the hoarse grinding of the locks, were not enough to rouse me from my lethargy. It needed his rough voice in my ear, and his heavy hand upon my arm. "Get up, will you?" I opened my eyes and sat up in terror. Just at that instant there fell through the high narrow grating of my cell, upon the ceiling of the adjoining corridor, the only ray of light I had seen for a long time, the yellow reflection, which eyes accustomed to the shade of a prison easily recognize as the sun. I love the sun. "It is a fair day," I said to the jailer. For a moment he did not answer, as if doubtful whether it were worth while to waste a word. Then with an effort he muttered roughly, "Perhaps it is." I was silent. My mind seemed half asleep, but my lips were smiling, and my eyes were fixed upon the soft ray of gold which illuminated the ceiling. "It is a beautiful day," I said again. "Yes," the man returned. "And they are waiting for you." The words, like a thread which breaks the flight of an insect, brought me violently back to reality. I saw again, like a flash of lightning, the dreary courtroom, the horseshoe of the judges which was covered with bloody rags, the 3 rows of stupid-looking witnesses, the 2 gendarmes on either side of me, and the swaying black gowns. Then, the billowy sea of heads at the farther end of the room, and the fixed gaze of the dozen jurors, who had kept watch while I slept. I rose. My teeth chattered, my hands trembled, my limbs shook. I could not find my clothes. At my first step I swayed like a man carrying too heavy a burden. But I followed the jailer. The 2 gendarmes were waiting at the door of my cell. They put handcuffs on my wrists, and carefully closed the complicated little padlocks. I let them do it. They were machines on a machine. We crossed an inner court. The brisk morning air revived me. I raised my head. The sky was blue, and the warm rays of the sun, falling across the long chimneys, marked great angles of light on the topmost walls of the dark prison. It was a beautiful day indeed. We ascended a spiral staircase, crossed a corridor, then another, and still a third, and finally reached a low door that stood open. A heavy odor and the confused murmuring voices came to me. It was the crowd in the courtroom. I entered. At sight of me there rose a clashing of arms and of voices. The benches were hastily moved back, the boards creaked, and as I crossed the room, between two crowds of people, flanked by soldiers, I felt that I was the center to which were attached the threads which pulled every gaping, staring face. Suddenly I noticed that I was without irons, but when or where they had been removed I had no idea. Then a great hush fell upon the room. I was in my place. As the noise and tumult of the crowd ceased, my mind also grew calm, and all at once I saw clearly, what up to then I had realized only in a dazed way, that the decisive moment had come, that I was there to hear my sentence. Explain it as you will, this thought caused me no terror. The windows were open. The air and the noise of the city fell upon my ears. The room was as bright as if there were to be a wedding there. The sun's rays fell here and there in shining crosses, upon the floor, on the tables, broken by the angles of the wall, and from the shining moldings of the windows each beam hung in the air, a great prism of shimmering gold. The judges on the platform had a satisfied air, probably because they had reached a decision. The features of the presiding judge, thrown into soft relief by a ray from one of the windows, looked calm and kind. A young attorney was smoothing out his cravat, and talking gaily to a pretty lady in a red bonnet, who as a mark of special favor had been given a seat behind him. The jurors alone appeared wearied and discouraged, but I thought they looked so because they had been up all night. Some of them yawned. Nothing in their kindly faces showed that they had just pronounced a death sentence. They seemed to me as if they wanted nothing but a good night's sleep. In front of me a window stood wide open. I heard the flower vendors laughing on the quay, and on the window bench a pretty little yellow plant, bathed in the sunlight, was playing with the wind in a cranny of the wall. How could a gloomy thought enter into the midst of so many pleasant ones? Surrounded by the outer air and the sunshine, I could think of nothing but liberty. Hope glowed within me, like the daylight without, and in perfect confidence I awaited my sentence, as one awaits freedom and life. My lawyer, whom they had been expecting, arrived at last. He had breakfasted heartily. Taking his place, he leaned toward me with a smile. "I have hope," said he. "So have I," I replied easily, smiling also. "Yes," he continued. "Although, of course, I know nothing of their decision, still I have no doubt they will refuse to find premeditation, and in that case it will be only penal servitude." "What do you mean, sir?" I asked indignantly. "I would prefer death 100 times." "Yes, death." Besides, some inner voice whispered, "What do I risk by saying this? Has a death sentence ever been pronounced except at 12 o'clock on a cold, drizzling winter night, in a dark and gloomy room, beneath the glare of candles? It would be impossible in the month of August, at 8 o'clock in the morning, on such a beautiful day, and by such a kind jury." And my eyes turned again to the pretty yellow flower playing in the sun. Then the presiding judge, who had been waiting only for my lawyer, told me to rise. The gendarmes presented arms, and as from an electric shock, the entire crowd stood up. A small, insignificant fellow, at a table below the judges, the clerk, I suppose he was, began to read the verdict of the jury. A cold perspiration came from my every limb, and I leaned against the wall to keep from falling. "Lawyer, have you anything to say as to why the sentence should not be pronounced?" asked the judge. I had everything to say, but no word came to me. My tongue clove to my mouth. The defense rose. I understood that he was trying to soften the decision of the jury, and to substitute for the punishment prescribed, the other suggestion, which had made me so angry. My indignation must indeed have been great, to make itself felt above the 1,000 conflicting emotions of my mind. I wanted to shout out what I had already told him. I prefer death 100 times. But breath failed me, and I could only grasp him roughly by the arm, and cry hoarsely, "No!" The Attorney General began to argue with the lawyer, and I listened with a dazed sort of satisfaction. The judges then withdrew. After a moment they returned, and the presiding judge read my sentence. "Condemned to die!" shouted the crowd, and while they led me away, the people rushed at my heels with the noise of a falling building. I walked along dazed and stupefied. A change had taken place in me. Up to the moment of the death sentence, I had been living, breathing among other men. Now I clearly saw that there was a high wall between the world and myself. Nothing seemed the same to me. The great shining windows, the beautiful sunshine, the clear sky, the pretty flower, all were white and dull, like a shroud. The crowd of men, women, and children following me were like phantoms. At the foot of the staircase, a dirty black and closely barred vehicle awaited me. As I stepped in, I happened to glance across the square. "A man condemned to die!" cried several passers-by, running toward the carriage. Through the cloud which seemed to rise between me and the surrounding objects, I saw 2 young girls following me with wide-opened eyes. "Good!" exclaimed the younger one, clapping her hands. "It will be in 6 weeks." Chapter 3. Condemned to die. Well, why not? Men. I remember to have read in some book which contained nothing else that was good. Men are all condemned to die with various reprieves. How is my position any different? Since my sentence was pronounced, how many have died who had expected a long life? How many have gone before me, who, young, free, and healthy, had counted on seeing my head fall upon the place to grieve? How many, even now, may die before me, who are now living, breathing the glad air, and coming and going as they please? And then, why should I want to live? The dull light, the black prison bread, the portion of thin soup, which is brought to me in a galley's bowl, the harsh treatment I receive from the jailers and keepers, I, who am refined and educated, without a single human being near me who thinks me worthy of a word or to whom I can speak, trembling at everything that I have done and that others are going to do, these are about the only blessings of which the hangman can rob me. But it is horrible. Chapter 4. The black carriage brought me here, to this hideous biseater. Seen from afar, the building is somewhat majestic in appearance. It spreads along the horizon, on the brow of a hill, and in the distance, still preserves some of its former splendor, the appearance of a king's chateau. But as one approaches, the palace is found to be in ruins. The fallen wings hurt one's feelings. Shame and poverty stare down from the royal facades. It looks as if there were leprosy behind the walls. It is without windows or window frames, with nothing but great iron crossbars, and here and there the wan face of a galley or a madman peering through. This is a near view of life. Chapter 5. Scarcely had I arrived, before handcuffs were placed on me. Precautions were redoubled. I was allowed neither knife nor fork at meals. The straitjacket, a sort of linen bag with wings, imprisoned my arms. The jailers were responsible for my life. I had sued for a writ of error. The troublesome business would not be over for 6 or 7 weeks, and it was important that I should reach the place de grieve safe and sound. During the first few days they treated me with a gentleness which was horrible. The respect of a jailer savors of the scaffold, but happily, after a time, their manner changed. I was handled like the other prisoners, with a common brutality, and received no more of the special and polite attentions which brought the hangman constantly before me. This was not the sole improvement. My youth, my submission, the interest that the prison chaplain took in me, and especially some Latin words which I addressed to the concierge, who did not understand them, made them allow me to walk once a week with the other prisoners, without the straitjacket, which was paralyzing me. After much hesitation, they also allowed me ink, paper, pens, and a night lamp. Every Sunday, after service, I am allowed in the yard at the hour of exercise, and then I talk with the prisoners. I have to. They are good fellows, the poor wretches. They tell me of their crimes, which are horrible to hear, but I know that they are boasting. They are teaching me to speak slang, to "rauskaler bigorn," swing the anvil, as they say. It is a language which has grown upon the general language like a hideous excrescence or wart. Sometimes it is strangely forcible and frightfully graphic. For instance, there is some juice on the trimar, blood on the road, to marry the widow, to be hanged, as if the rope of the hangman were the widow of every one who is hanged. A robber's head has 2 names, the Sorbonne, when it plans, reasons out, and advises crime, the tranche, when the hangman cuts it off. Sometimes the language has the wit of a vaudeville, as a wicker cashmere, a rag picker's basket, the leer, the tongue, and then, everywhere, every instant, strange, mysterious words occur, rough and unseemly, coined, one knows not where, as the tall, the hangman, the cone, death, the placard, the place of execution. They use the words toads and spiders. To hear this language spoken gives one an idea of something dirty and dusty, of a bundle of rags shaken in front of one. But these men pity me, at least, and they are the only ones. The jailers, the wardens, and the turnkeys, I hate them, talk and laugh, and discuss me before my very eyes, as if I were a thing. Chapter 6. I said to myself, since I have writing materials, why not use them? But what shall I write? Imprisoned within 4 stone walls, cold and bare, without space to walk, without a horizon for my eyes, my one diversion consisting in following mechanically throughout the entire day the slow march of the white square which the peephole of my door cuts out on the opposite dull wall, and as I just now said, alone with one idea, an idea of crime and punishment, of murder and of death. Is there anything for me to tell, I who have nothing left to do in this world? What would there be in my worn-out and empty brain which would be worth writing? And yet why not? If everything about me is dull and monotonous, is there not within me a tempest, a strife, a tragedy? Does not this fixed thought which possesses me appear before me, every hour, every instant, under a new form, more hideous and bloody as the time approaches? Why should I not try to tell myself all that is strange and dreadful in my loneliness? Surely the field is a wide one, and short as my life may be between now and then, there will be plenty of chances to use my pen and ink in writing of the agony, the terror, and the tortures that assail me. Besides, the only way to lighten my agony is to study it, and writing it will be a distraction to me. Perhaps, too, what I write will not be wholly useless. This diary of my suffering, hour after hour, minute after minute, torture after torture, if I have strength enough left to carry it up to the moment when it will be physically impossible to continue it, may not this story, necessarily unfinished, but as complete as possible, of my feelings, carry with it a great and mighty lesson? Might there not be more than a lesson for those who convict, in this verbal process of agonizing thought, in this ever-increasing chain of suffering, in this kind of intellectual autopsy of a man condemned to die? Perhaps my story will make them more lenient, when at some future time the question arises of throwing a thinking head, a man's head, into what they call the scales of justice. Perhaps the wretched men have never thought of the slow succession of tortures included under the expeditious form of a death sentence. Have they ever considered the painful thought that in the man whom they condemn there is an intellect which had counted on life, a soul which was not prepared for death? No. In all that, they see only the vertical fall of a triangular knife, thinking, no doubt, that for the condemned man there is nothing before or after. These leaves will undeceive them. Perhaps they will be published some day, and may make the mind of these men ponder an instant upon mental suffering. For this they do not suspect. They triumph at being able to kill without making the body suffer. Ah, that is what they think. But what is physical suffering when compared to moral? How horrible and pitiful it is that laws should be made thus. The day will come, and perhaps these memoirs, the last confidences of a poor wretch, may help to hasten it. At least, after my death, may the wind not play in the yard with these sheets of paper, covered with mud, may they not rot in the rain, pasted like stars to the broken window of a jailer's room. Chapter 7. May all that I write here someday be of use to others. May it keep the judge from pronouncing death sentences. May it save poor wretches, whether they are innocent or not, from the agony to which I am condemned. And yet why? To what end? For what good? When my head is cut off, what difference will it make to me if they cut off other heads? Can I really think of such nonsense as this? Suppose they hurl down the scaffold after I have mounted it. I ask you, what good will it do me? What? The sun, the spring, the flowering fields, the birds who awake in the morning, the clouds, the trees, nature, liberty, life, have I lost them all? Ah! It is I who must be saved. Is it really true that this cannot be, that I must die tomorrow, today perhaps? Is this true? O God! What a horrible idea it is to dash out one's brains against the walls of one's prison. Chapter 8. let me count the time that still remains. 3 days stay after the sentence, for the writ of error. 8 days of oblivion before the Court of Appeals, after which the briefs, as they are called, are filed with the clerk. 15 days delay at the clerk's, who does not know that they even exist, and who, nevertheless, is supposed to have transmitted them, after examination, to the Court of Appeals. There, each one is classified, numbered, and registered, for the guillotine is crowded, and each must go in turn. 15 days to watch for something which may not favor you in the end. Finally, the court sits, usually on a Thursday, rejects 20 writs together, sends them all back to the clerk, who in turn sends them to the Attorney General, who transmits them to the hangman. 3 days. On the morning of the 4th, the deputy of the Attorney General says to himself, as he ties his cravat, "We must bring this case to a close." Then, if the deputy clerk is not kept at home by a breakfast with some friends, the warrant of execution is drawn up, written, copied fair, and dispatched, and the following day at dawn a frame is heard being erected on the place de Grève, and in the streets criers are shouting with hoarse voices. 6 weeks in all. The young girl was right, but here are at least 5 and perhaps 6 weeks, I dare not stop to count which, that I have already been in this prison of Bicester, and it seems to me that 3 days ago was Thursday. Chapter 9. I have just made my will. And yet what is the use? I am condemned at great cost, and all that I have will scarcely suffice to settle it. The guillotine is very expensive. I leave a mother, a wife, and 1 child. A little girl, 3 years old, sweet, rosy, and frail, with great black eyes and long, nut-brown hair. She was 2 years and 1 month old when I last saw her. So, after my death, there will be 3 women, without a son, a husband, and a father, 3 orphans, so to speak, 3 widows in point of law. I admit that I am justly punished, but what have these innocent ones done? No matter, they are disgraced, ruined. This is justice. It is not my poor old mother who troubles me. She will die. Or, if she lasts a few days longer, if up to the last moment she has a few warm coals in her stove, she will say nothing. Nor is it my wife who troubles me. She is already weak and in poor health. She will die too. I hope she will not go mad. They say that makes one live. But at least the mind does not suffer. It sleeps, and is as if it were dead. But my daughter, my child, my poor little Marie, who laughs and plays, who is singing even now, and thinking of nothing. Ah! It is this that hurts me. Chapter 10. My cell consists of this: 8 square feet and 4 walls of freestone at right angles to a flagstone floor, which is raised 1 step above the outer corridor. To the right of the door, upon entering, is a sort of recess, a parody on an alcove. Here they have thrown a bit of straw on which the prisoner is supposed to rest and sleep, covered with a pair of linen trousers and a coat of ticking, the same, winter and summer. Above my head, instead of the sky, is a black vault, an ogive, it is called, from which hang thick cobwebs like rags. For the rest, there are no windows, not even a vent-hole, and the 1 wooden door is entirely covered with iron. No, I am wrong. In the center of the door, toward the top, there is an opening, 9 thumbs in width, cut out in the shape of a cross, and which at night is closed by the jailer. Outside is a long corridor, lighted and aired by means of narrow vent-holes near the ceiling, and divided into stone compartments, which open into one another by a series of low, arched doors. Each compartment serves as some sort of an antechamber to a cell like mine. In these cells are the criminals sentenced by the director of the prison to severe discipline. The first 3 cells are reserved for those condemned to die, because, being nearer the jail, they are more convenient for the jailer. These cells are all that is left of the ancient chateau of Bicester, as it was built in the 15th century by the Cardinal of Winchester. He was the one who ordered Jeanne d'Arc burned. I heard this from some visitors who came to see me the other day in my cell, and who looked at me from a distance as though I were a beast in a menagerie. They gave the jailer 100 sous for admitting them. I forgot to say that day and night there is a gendarme at the door of my cell, and that I cannot raise my eyes to the square hole without always finding his, wide open, and staring at me. People suppose that there are air and light in this stone box. Chapter 11. Since it was not yet daylight, I was wondering what I should do with the night, when all at once an idea came into my mind. I rose and turned my lamp upon the four walls of my cell. They are covered with names, scrawls, and strange figures, one running into the other. It seems as though each convict wanted to leave a mark behind him here, at least. They are in pencil, chalk, charcoal, black, white, and gray, and often are cut deep into the stone, while here and there are rusty marks that might have been written with blood. Surely, were my mind clear, I would take much interest in this strange book which is developing, page after page, before my eyes on every stone of my cell. I should like to gather all these fragmentary thoughts together that are scattered over the stones, and find the owner under every name, and give life and feeling to these worn-out inscriptions, these broken sentences, these mangled words, these bodies without heads, like those who wrote them. At the head of my bed are two burning hearts pierced by an arrow, and above are written the words, "Love for life." The unfortunate writer did not make a long engagement. By the side of this is a three-cornered hat with a small figure roughly sketched above it, and these words, "Long live the Emperor!" 1824, more burning hearts, with the inscription, a characteristic one in a prison, "I love and adore Matthew Danvin." Jock. On the opposite wall is Papavoine. The capital P is embellished with arabesques, and is carefully drawn. A stanza of an obscene song. A liberty cap cut deep into the stone, with this below. Boris Dot, the Republic. He was one of the 4 sub-officers of La Rochelle. Poor fellow. How hideous are their imaginary political needs! For an idea, a dream, a thought, to meet this dread reality called the guillotine. And I am complaining, I, a wretch who has committed a real crime, who has spilled blood. I shall look no further among the inscriptions. I have just seen, in white crayon in the corner of the wall, a frightful picture, the picture of the scaffold which perhaps is being built even now for me. The lamp just escaped falling from my hands. Chapter 12. I sat down hurriedly on my straw, and my head fell forward upon my knees. But as soon as my childish terror had passed away, I felt a strange curiosity to look again along the wall. Next to the name of Papavoine, I removed a huge spider web, thick with dust, from a corner of the wall. Behind the web were 4 or 5 names which were perfectly legible, and several others of which only a faint impression remained. Dawden, 1815, Pauline, 1818, Jean Martin, 1821, Casting, 1823. As I read these names, I remembered the sad fate of each. Dawden cut his brother into pieces, and one night threw the head into a fountain and the body into a sewer in Paris. Pauline murdered his wife. Jean Martin shot his father, as the old man was opening a window. Casting, the physician, poisoned his friend, and instead of trying to cure him, as he pretended to do, he gave him more poison. Near to these was Papavoine, the dreadful madman who killed children by cutting open their heads. A hot shiver went through me. These are the ones, I thought to myself, who have occupied my cell before me. Here, on the very floor on which I am standing, they thought their last thoughts, these bloody murderers. In this very dungeon, within these very walls, their last steps turned back and forth like a wild beast. Others took their places without delay. It seems that the cell is never empty. They left the place warm, and it is to me they left it. I, in turn, shall follow them to Clamart Cemetery, where the grass is always green. I am neither visionary nor superstitious. Perhaps these thoughts are making me feverish, but while I was thinking of them, it seemed to me all at once that these fatal names were written in lines of fire on the dark wall. A wild ringing was in my ears, a red glare came before my eyes, and then it seemed as though the dungeon were full of men, strange men, who carried their heads in their left hands, and held their hands between their teeth, for they had no hair. All shook their fists at me, except the parricide. I closed my eyes in horror, but they all came before me still more distinctly. Whether it was a dream, a vision, or a reality, I should have gone mad if a sudden thought had not dispelled them. I was on the point of falling when I felt crawling over my bare foot, a cold body with hairy legs. It was the spider whose web I had torn down. That brought me back to myself. Oh, the frightful specters! No, it was all a phantom, an idea of my empty and tortured brain. A fancy like Macbeth's. The dead are dead, those who have been here, at least. They are safely locked within the tomb. It is not a prison from which one can escape. How could I have been so terrified? The door of the tomb does not open from within. Chapter 13. A few days ago I saw a horrible sight. It happened before daylight. The prison was very noisy. I heard the opening and closing of the heavy gates, the turning of the locks and the iron bolts, the clank of the heavy bunches of keys hanging from the jailer's waists, the stairs creaking from top to bottom beneath hurried steps, and voices calling and answering from one end of the long corridors to the other. My neighbors in the cell of correction were more gay than usual. All bystanders seemed to be laughing, singing, running, and dancing. I, the only quiet one in all this hubbub, the only still being in all the uproar, sat wondering and on the alert, listening to every sound. A jailer passed. I ventured to call and ask him if there was a fete going on in the prison. "You may call it a fete if you like," he replied. "Today they are going to put the irons on the convicts who start tomorrow for Toulon. Do you want to see them? It will amuse you." A show of any kind, however disagreeable, was a lucky thing for a solitary prisoner, and I accepted the fellow's offer. The jailer took the usual precautions to make sure of me, and then led me into a small empty cell, which contained not an article of furniture. It had a grated window, but a real window nevertheless, breast high, and from which the real sky was visible. "Here," said he, "you can see and hear. You will be alone in your box, like a king." He went out, drawing after him the locks, bolts, and bars. The window looked out upon a good-sized square court, around the four sides of which, like a wall, rose a great stone structure 6 stories high. Nothing could be more disagreeable, more forlorn, nor more wretched-looking than that facade with its many barred gratings, behind which peered out, above and below, a crowd of thin, white faces, one over the other, like the stones in a wall, and all framed, as it were, between the iron bars. They were the prisoners, watching the ceremony in which some day they were to take part. They looked like souls who were undergoing the punishment of purgatory, on their way to hell. They were watching in silence the empty court. They were waiting. Among the tired, heavy faces, here and there shone out wild, piercing eyes, like sparks of fire. The prison which surrounded the 4 sides of the square was not an unbroken wall. One of the 4 sides, the one looking to the east, was separated near the center, and was connected to the other part by an iron railing. This railing opened on to a second court, smaller than the first, and like it, flanked with walls full of black holes. Around the walls of the main court were placed stone benches. In the center was an iron pole for holding a lantern. Noon struck. A large porte cochere hidden behind a projection was suddenly opened. A wagon appeared, escorted by a species of dirty and shamefaced-looking soldiers in blue uniforms, with red epaulets and yellow shoulder straps. It dragged heavily across the court with the noise of grating iron. It contained the chowrim, the galley slaves, and the chains. At the same instant, as though that sound had roused every other, the spectators at the windows, who, until then, had stood still and silent, burst out into joyful cries and songs and threats and imprecations, mingled with shouts of laughter, painful to hear. They looked and acted like devils. A grin was on every face, every fist was thrust through the bars, every voice cried out, every eye flamed. I was startled to see such sparks bursting out from the cinders. The keepers, among whom I recognized from their fresh clothes and their apparent fright some curious visitors from Paris, went calmly on with their work. One jumped into the wagon, and threw out the chains, traveling collars, and bundles of linen trousers. Then they divided the work. Some went to a corner of the court, and unwound the long chains, which, in their slang, are called the strings. Others spread out on the pavement the taffetas, the shirts and trousers. The wisest, under the eye of their captain, a short, thick-set old man, examined the iron collars, which they tested still further by throwing them upon the pavement. All this went on under the derisive shouts of the prisoners, and the loud laughter of the convicts for whom it was done, and who were lined up behind the gratings of the old prison, which looked out upon the small court. When these preliminaries were over, a gentleman with silver embroidery on his coat, whom they called the inspector, gave an order to the director of the prison, and a moment later, from 2 or 3 of the lower doors, there poured out all at once into the court, like a cloud of smoke, hideous crowds of ragged, shouting men. These were the convicts. At sight of them, the clamor at the windows increased. Some of those who bore great names were welcomed with cries and shouts, which they received with a sort of proud modesty. The most of them wore caps which they had themselves woven from the straw in their cells, of so curious a shape that those who wore them could not fail to be noticed. One in particular aroused shouts of enthusiasm, a young man, perhaps 17 years of age, with a face as smooth as a girl's. He came out of his cell where he had been for a week. He had made a garment out of straw, which covered him from head to foot, and he sprang into the court, rolling over and over, with the agility of a serpent. He was a juggler, convicted of theft. There was a burst of hand-clapping and shouts of joy. The galley slaves answered it, and the exchange of gaiety between the real convicts and the candidates was frightful. Society, represented by the jailers and the frightened visitors, was of small account there. Crime laughed in its very face, and made a family fete of this frightful punishment. As each convict came out, he was led between two lines of gendarmes to the barred court, where he waited for the visit of the physicians. It was at this point that each tried a last resort in order to escape the journey, offering as an excuse their health, poor eyesight, lameness, or a maimed hand. But almost all were found fitted for work, and each resigned himself carelessly, forgetting a few minutes after his pretended life infirmity. The grating of the small court opened, a guard called the roll alphabetically, and then each convict came out, one by one, and took his stand in a corner of the large court, next to a comrade whose initial letter happened to be the same. Thus each was alone, carrying his own chain, side by side with a stranger, and if a convict chanced to be near a friend, the chains separated them. This was their greatest punishment. When about 30 had gone out, the grating was closed. A keeper singled them out with his baton, threw in front of each a shirt, a jacket, and a pair of coarse linen trousers, then gave the signal, and they all began to undress. An unlooked-for incident changed this humiliation into torture. Until then the weather had been clear, and although the October air was cold, every now and then the gray clouds opened, and from the chinks fell a ray of sunlight. But scarcely had the convicts dropped their prison rags, and just as they stood naked before the suspicious glances of the keepers, and the curious looks of the strangers who walked around them in order to examine their shoulders, the sky became black. A cold autumn rain began to fall in torrents upon the square court, upon the bare heads and naked bodies of the galley slaves, and upon their miserable clothes lying on the pavement. In the twinkling of an eye the yard was cleared of everyone who was not a keeper or a galley slave. The visitors from Paris sought shelter beneath the doorways. The rain fell in torrents. Nothing could be seen in the court but the naked, dripping convicts on the soaked pavement. A moody silence had succeeded their boastful shouting. They shivered, their teeth chattered, their thin limbs and bent knees knocked against each other, and it was pitiful to see them putting over their blue bodies the shirts, jackets, and trousers which were soaked with the rain. They would better have remained naked. One old man, however, was still lively. He cried out, wringing his dripping shirt, that this was not on the program. Then he began to laugh, shaking his fist at the sky. When they had put on their traveling clothes, they were led in groups of 20 or 30 to the other corner of the yard, where the cordons awaited them. These cordons are great long chains crossed every 2 feet by other shorter chains, at the end of which is attached a square collar which opens by means of a hinge fastened to one of the corners, and closes at the opposite corner by an iron bolt, locked on the galley slave's neck throughout the entire journey. As these cordons lie on the ground they look like the backbone of a fish. They made the slaves sit down in the mud on the soaking pavements. They tried on the collars. Then 2 of the prison blacksmiths brought portable anvils, and riveted them on with a great iron hammer. It was a dreadful moment, and the bravest paled. At every stroke of the hammer upon the anvil, which leaned against their back, the victim's chin rebounded. The least movement made his head jump like a nutshell. After this was done the convicts became gloomy. Nothing was heard but the clanking of the chains, an occasional groan, and the dull thud of the keeper's baton on the limbs of the offender. Some cried. The old men shivered and bit their lips. I looked with terror upon all these sinister profiles in their iron frames. After the visit of the physicians, came that of the jailers, and after the jailers, the putting into chains. 3 acts to the play. A ray of sunlight appeared. It acted like a touch of fire. The convicts rose with one accord. The 5 cordons took hold of hands, and all together they formed an immense circle about the lantern pole. My eyes grew weary watching them turn. They sang a prison song, a slangy romance, to a tune now sad, now wild and gay. Every now and then shrill cries were heard and bursts of hoarse, breathless laughter, mingled with strange words. Then furious shouts rang out, the clanking chains serving as an orchestra to the song, which was harsher than their grating. If ever I wanted a picture of a nocturnal meeting of witches, I should ask for nothing better or worse than this. A large tub was brought into the yard. The keeper stopped the dance with his baton, and led the convicts to this tub, in which some herbs were floating in a dirty, smoky liquid. They began to eat. When they had finished, they threw upon the pavement what was left of their soup and brown bread, and began to dance and sing again. It seems that this privilege is allowed them on this day and the following night. I was watching the strange sight with such a hungry, trembling, close attention, that I had forgotten myself. A great pity filled me, and their laughter made me weep. Suddenly, in the midst of my deep reverie, I saw the shouting circle stop and grow silent. Then every eye turned toward my window. "The condemned man! The condemned man!" they cried, shaking their fingers, and the bursts of laughter increased. I stood petrified. I had no idea where they had seen me before or how they recognized me. "Good morning! Good evening!" they cried, with their horrible chuckle. One of the youngest, who was condemned to the galleys, gave me a dull look of envy, and exclaimed, "He is happy! He will be cut off! Beheaded! Farewell, comrade!" I cannot describe my feelings. I was their comrade, in truth. La Grève is sister to Toulon. I was even on a lower level than they. They did me an honor. I shivered. Yes, their comrade. And in a few days I, too, might be an amusing sight for them. I was standing at the window, immovable, petrified, paralyzed. But when I saw the 5 cordons rush toward me with words of infernal goodfellowship, when I heard the frightful clanking of their chains, their shouts, their steps at the foot of the wall, it seemed as though this crowd of demons were climbing into my wretched cell. I gave a shriek, and hurled myself against the door with force enough to break it. No means of escape. The locks were drawn on the outside. I yelled, I shouted in fury. Then I seemed to hear the convicts' fearful voices coming nearer. I thought that their hideous faces were already at my window. I gave a second agonizing cry, and fell senseless to the floor. Chapter 14. When I recovered consciousness, it was night. I was on a pallet. A lantern threw a flickering light on the ceiling, and I saw rows of other pallets on both sides of mine. I knew that I was in the hospital. For a moment I lay awake, but without thinking of anything, entirely given up to the joy of being in a bed. Once, this hospital and prison cot would have made me shudder in disgust and pity, but I was no longer the same man. To be sure, the sheets were soiled and coarse to the touch, and the covering thin and ragged. I felt the boards beneath the mattress, but what of that? My limbs could stretch out between the rough sheets, and beneath the covering, thin as it was, I felt that horrible cold in my bones slowly beginning to disappear. I fell asleep again. I was awakened by a great uproar. It was daybreak. The noise came from without. My bed was by the side of a window, and I rose to see what was happening. The window looked out upon the great court of Bicêtre, which was filled with people. 2 lines of veterans had all they could do to make a narrow path across the court in the midst of the crowd. Between this double line of soldiers, 5 long wagons full of men were jogging slowly along, jostling over each stone. They were the convicts who were leaving. The wagons were uncovered. Each cordon occupied one. The convicts were seated sidewise on the benches, one leaning against the other, separated by their common chain, which lay along the entire length of the wagon, at the end of which stood a keeper, gun in hand. The clanking of the irons could be heard, and at every shake of the wagon, their heads were jerked forward and their dangling legs shook. A fine, thin rain was falling, making the air frigid, and causing their gray linen trousers, which were already black, to cling to their knees. The rain poured from their long beards and short hair. Their faces were purple. They were shivering, and their teeth chattered with rage and cold. More than this, they could not move. Once riveted within the chain, one is no longer anything but a part of that hideous cordon which moves like one man. The intellect leaves one. The prison collar condemns it to death, and as to the being himself, He has no longer desires and an appetite except at fixed hours. So motionless, the most of them half naked, with bare heads and dangling feet, they began their journey of 25 days, seated in the same wagons, and dressed in the same clothes under the perpendicular sun of July as in the cold rains of November. One might say that in their office of hangman, men wished the climate to do half. Some sort of a horrible harangue arose between the people and those in the wagons, abuse on the one side, bravado on the other, curses on both. But at a sign from the captain, I saw blows raining from the baton upon the wagons, on shoulders and heads alike, and everything assumed that exterior calm called order. But the wretches' eyes were full of vengeance, and their fists were clenched on their knees. The 5 wagons, guarded by mounted gendarmes and keepers on foot, disappeared one after another beneath the high arched gate of Bicêtre. A 6th followed, in which the kettles, brass porringers, and extra chains rattled together in noisy confusion. Some keepers who had been detained at the canteen ran out to catch up with their squad. The crowd began to scatter. The picture vanished like a phantasmagoria. By degrees, the heavy rolling of the wheels and the tramp of the horses' hoofs on the paved road from Fontainebleau grew faint, and the crack of the whips, the clank of the chains, and the cries of the people wishing the galleys an unlucky journey, died away. But for them it was only the beginning. What was it the lawyer said to me? The galleys, ah yes! Death 1,000 times, the scaffold rather than the galleys, nothing rather than hell. I would give my neck to the knife of the guillotine, but not to the prison collar. The galleys, just heaven. Chapter 15. Unfortunately I was not ill, and the next day I had to leave the hospital and return to my cell. Not ill, ah no, I am young, strong, and healthy. The blood runs freely in my veins. My every member answers my every fancy. I am strong in mind and body. I was made to live long. Yes, this is all true, and yet I have a malady, a mortal malady, a malady made by the hand of man. Since I came from the hospital, the idea has come to me to become mad. Perhaps I might escape if I could do this. The doctors and the sisters of charity seemed to be interested in me. To die so young, and such a death. One would have thought they were sorry for me, they gathered so close about my pallet. Bah! It was from curiosity. And then, these people who help you, cure you of a fever, but not of a death sentence. Yet that would be so easy for them. An open door. What would it matter to them? I have no chance now. My appeal will be rejected because everything is correct. The witnesses testified clearly. The plaintiffs have pleaded well. The judges have sentenced. I do not expect, but, no, what folly! There is no more hope. The appeal is a rope which holds you suspended above an abyss, and which creaks every moment until it breaks. It is as if the knife of the guillotine took 6 weeks to fall. Suppose I were pardoned? Pardoned? And by whom? And why? And how? It is not possible for them to pardon me. It is for an example, as they say. Only 3 steps remain for me: Bicêtre, the Conciergerie, La Grève. Chapter 16. During the few hours that I spent in the hospital I sat near a window in the sunshine. It had come out again, or at least in as much of it as could creep in through the grating. I sat there, with my heavy head in my hands, which was more than they could hold, my elbows on my knees, and my feet on the rounds of my chair, for I am so weak that I lean over as though I no longer had either bones in my limbs or muscles in my flesh. The close air of the prison was worse than ever. My ears still rang with the noise of the galleys' chains, and I was growing very tired of Bicêtre. It seemed to me that God ought to pity me, that He might at least send me a little bird to sing to me from the edge of the opposite roof. I do not know whether it was God or the devil who answered my wish, but almost at that very moment I heard a voice beneath my window, not that of a bird, but what was better, the pure, fresh, clear voice of a young girl of 15. I raised my head with a start, and listened greedily to the song she sung. The air was slow and languishing, a kind of sad and lamentable cooing. The words were something like these. It was in the Rue du Mail I was caught, oh sorry tale! Wretched I! By 3 gendarmes, cruel men, who came rushing at me when I passed by. I cannot tell you how bitter was my disappointment, the voice sang on. They came rushing at me, so! Put great handcuffs on me, oh! Such a load. Then arrived the police spy, and a robber friend came by on the road, a friend both quick and rife, nimble. And I cried, "Go tell my wife I am caught." Then my wife came with a run, "Husband, tell me, what hast done?" Thus she fought. Thus my wife in rage began, and I said, "I've killed a man, oh, my dear. His gold watch and money too, and his rings so bright and new, I have here. Yes, his rings so new and bright." My poor wife set out that night for Versailles. A petition she did bring for my pardon, begged the king, with a cry, sought the king to plead my cause. And had I escaped the laws, wretched I would deck my wife, I say, in rich silks, and ribbons gay I would buy. Slippers too I'd have her wear, but the king in wrath did swear, by my crown, I will make him dance a dance o'er a floorless, broad expanse, dangling down. I could hear no more, nor did I wish to, the half-veiled meaning of the horrible complaint, the struggle of the brigand with the sentinel, the robber he meets, and sends to his wife with the horrible message. "I have killed a man, and have been arrested, I have made an oak tree sweat, and I am caught." The woman running to Versailles with a petition, and his majesty growing indignant, and threatening the accused to make him dance the dance where there is no floor. All this sung to the sweetest tune in the sweetest voice human ear ever heard. I was amazed, petrified, completely broken down. It was so dreadful that all these terrible words should come from such fresh and rosy lips. It was like drivel from a slug on a rose. I cannot describe my feelings. I was both ashamed and sorry. The patois of the prison and the galleys, such strange and bloody language, such hideous slang, sung by a young girl, in a voice that was a graceful combination of a child's and a woman's, all these deformed, shapeless words sung with such delicacy and rhythm. Ah, what an infamous place a prison is! There is a poison about it which spoils everything. Everything is tarnished by it, even the song of a young girl of 15. You find a bird there, it has mud on its wing. You gather a pretty flower, you smell it, its odor is offensive. Chapter 17. Oh, if I could only escape, how I would run! But no, one should not run. That would rouse suspicion. One should walk slowly, and sing, with head erect. If possible, one should wear an old blue smock frock with red figures on it. That would be a good disguise. Every gardener in the neighborhood wears one. I know a thicket near Arcueil, by the side of a swamp, where I used to come with the fellows every Thursday when I was at college, to fish for frogs. I would hide there until evening. When night came I would go on again. I would go to Vincennes. No, the river would prevent me. I would go to Arpajon. It might be better to go by Saint-Germain, to Havre, and embark for England. Well, in any case, I would finally reach Longjumeau. A gendarme passes me. He asks for my passport. I am lost. Ah, poor dreamer! First break the 3 feet of thick wall which holds you a prisoner. Death. Death. And to think that once when I was a child I came here to buy cedar, to see the great dungeons and the madmen. Chapter 18. While I have been writing all this, my lamp has grown dim, daylight has come, the chapel clock has struck 6. What does that mean? My keeper has just been into my cell. He took off his cap, bowed to me, apologized for disturbing me, and asked me in as mild a tone as his tough voice could command, what I wanted for breakfast. I began to shiver. Will it happen today? Chapter 19. Yes, it is going to happen today. The director of the prison came himself to see me. He asked me what he could do for me. He hoped I had nothing to complain of, either in regard to him or his subordinates. Asked with interest about my health, and how I had passed the night. As he was leaving, he called me sir. It is to happen today. Chapter 20. This jailer thinks I have no complaint to make of him or his subordinates, and he is right. It would be wrong indeed of me to complain. They have done their duty in guarding me carefully, and they have been polite at all times. Should I not be content? This good jailer, with his gentle smile and kind words, his eye which flatters and at the same time spies, his great thick hands, he is the prison incarnate. He is Biceder personified. Everything is a prison about me. I find it in every form, under the human form as under that of lock and key. This wall is the prison in stone. This door is the prison in wood. The keepers are prisons in flesh and bone. The prison is a horrible being, Complete, indivisible, half house, half man. I am its prey. It broods over me. It holds me in its close embrace. It encloses me within its granite walls, clasps me beneath its iron bolts, and watches me with its jailer's eyes. Ah, wretch that I am! What shall I become? What do they want to do with me? Chapter 21. I am calm now. All is well over. I have recovered from the horrible anxiety which the director's visit gave me. For I will confess I did have hope. Now, thank God, I have none. This is what has just taken place. Just as the clock struck 6:30, no, 15:15, my prison door opened. An old man with white hair, in a long brown cloak, entered. His cloak was thrown back, and I saw a cassock and a band. He was a priest. But he was not the prison chaplain, and this did not augur well. He sat down opposite me, and smiled kindly. Then he bowed his head, and raised his eyes to heaven, that is, to the ceiling of my cell. I understood what he meant. "My son," said he, "are you prepared?" I answered in a weak voice. "I am not prepared, but I am ready." A mist rose before my eyes, an icy perspiration came out all over me. I felt my temples swelling and my ears ringing. While I swayed in my chair as though half asleep, the good man talked to me. At least I think he did. I seem to remember that his lips moved, and while his hands clasped each other, his eyes lighted up. The door opened a second time. The grating of the key roused me from my stupor and him from his discourse. A gentleman in black, accompanied by the director of the prison, appeared, and bowed low to me. The man wore on his face that sad official look which belongs to undertakers. He held a roll of paper in his hand. "Monsieur," he said with a courteous smile, "I am the bailiff from the Royal Courthouse of Paris. I have the honor to bring you a message from the Attorney General." The first shock over, all my presence of mind returned. "Is it the Attorney General?" I asked. "Who demands my head? I feel highly honored that he has written to me. I trust that my death will give him much pleasure, for it would be hard to think that he asked for it so anxiously, and that after all it was indifferent to him." I said all this, and continued in a firm voice. "Read it, sir." He began to read a long document, chanting at the end of every line, and hesitating between each word. It was the refusal of my appeal. "The sentence will be carried out today, on the Place de Grève," he added, when he had finished, and without raising his eyes from the paper. "We leave at exactly 7:30 for the conciergerie. My dear sir, will you be good enough to be ready?" I had heard nothing for a moment or two. The director was talking with the priest, who was gazing at the paper. I glanced toward the half-open door. Ah, miserable fool! 4 soldiers stood in the corridor. The bailiff repeated his question, this time looking at me. "Whenever you please," I replied. "You may make yourself easy." He bowed, saying, "I shall have the honor of returning for you in half an hour." Then they left me alone. Oh God! Some means of escape. Some means, I know not what. I must escape. I must. And at once. By the door, the window, through the timbers of the roof, even though I leave my skin on the beams. Oh, fury! Demons! Malediction! It would take mouths to pierce through the walls with the best of instruments, and I have not even a nail or an hour. Chapter 22. In the conciergerie here I am transferred, as the report says. But the journey is worth describing. The clock was striking 7:30 as the bailiff again presented himself at the door of my cell. "Monsieur," said he, "I am ready for you." Alas! He and others as well. I rose and took one step forward. It seemed as though I could not take another, my head was so heavy and my limbs so weak. But after a moment I recovered myself, and walked with firm steps. Before leaving the cell, I cast a last glance at it. I loved it, that cell. Then I left it empty and open, a strange thing in a cell. But it will not remain so very long. This evening they expect someone, the jailers said, a convict whom the court of assizes is sentencing even now. At a turn of the corridor the priest joined us. He had just breakfasted. As we left the jail, the director took me affectionately by the hand, and added 4 veterans to my escort. Before the door of the hospital a dying old man cried out to me. Au revoir! We reached the courtyard, where I breathed again. The air did me good. We did not walk far, however. A carriage drawn by post horses was waiting in the first court. It was the same that had brought me, a kind of long cabriolet, divided into two sections by a longitudinal grating of iron wire, so thick that it looked as if it might have been knitted. Each section had a door, one in front, the other at the rear of the cabriolet. The whole thing was so dirty, so black and dusty, that a hearse for paupers would be a king's chariot in comparison. Before burying myself in this two-wheeled tomb, I glanced about the yard with a desperate look, before which the very walls might have crumbled. The court, a small square, planted with trees, was even fuller of spectators than it had been for the galleys. Already the crowd had begun. As on the day of the departure of the galleys, a fine, icy rain was falling, which is coming down even now as I write, and which will probably continue all day, even after I am gone. The roads were rough, the courtyard full of mud and water. I was glad to see the crowd standing in all this mud. The bailiff and a gendarme stepped into the front compartment, the priest, a second gendarme, and myself into the other. There were 4 mounted gendarmes around the carriage. So, without the driver, there were 8 men to 1. As I stepped in, an old woman with gray eyes exclaimed, "I like this even better than the galleys." I understood what she meant. It was a sight that was more easily grasped and sooner over. It was just as pleasant and more convenient. There is nothing to distract one. There is only one man, and on him alone is centered as much misery as on all the galleys together. Only it is less scattered, it is a concentrated liquor, and much sweeter. The carriage began to move. It made a dull sound as it passed under the arch of the great entrance. Then it turned into the avenue, and the dark walls of Bicester were lost behind us. As in a stupor I felt myself carried on, like a man in a lethargy, who knows that he is being buried, yet who can neither move nor cry. In a vague way I heard the jingling of the bells on the horses' necks, keeping time, and playing a sort of hiccup, the iron wheels moving over the pavement, or grating against the carriage as it crossed the ruts in the road, the even gallop of the gendarmes on either side of the carriage, and the lashing of the driver's whip. It all seemed like a whirlwind that was sweeping me away. Through a hole in the wire grating opposite me, my eyes fell mechanically on the inscription engraved in large letters above the great door of Bicester. Hospital for the Aged. Ah, I said to myself. There are people who indeed grow old there, and as happens between sleep and waking, I turned the idea over and over again in my mind, which was already dull with grief. All at once the carriage passed from the avenue into the high road, and the point of view of my skylight was changed. The towers of Notre Dame arose blue and dim in the mist of Paris. Immediately the viewpoint of my mind changed also. I was a machine like the carriage. To the thought of Bicester now succeeded the thought of the towers of Notre Dame. Those who are on the tower where the flag is have a fine view, I said to myself, smiling stupidly. I think that it was at that moment that the priest began to speak. I patiently let him talk. The noise of the wheels, the gallop of the horses, the lash of the driver's whip, still were in my ears. The priest's words were only an extra noise, so I listened in silence to the monotonous fall of words which lulled my mind like the murmur of a fountain, and which passed before me, always varied, yet always the same, like the gnarled elms along the highroad, when suddenly I was roused by the sharp, jerky voice of the bailiff. "Well, Monsieur Abbé," said he, in a tone that sounded almost gay, "what news have you?" He turned to the priest. The latter continued talking to me, and made no reply. The noise of the carriage wheels drowned the bailiff's words. "Oh," he continued, raising his voice above the noise of the carriage. "This infernal wagon!" "Infernal indeed," he went on. "No doubt it is the joggling of the carriage that prevents his hearing me. What was I saying? Tell me what was I saying, Monsieur Abbé? Oh, yes. Do you know the news of Paris today?" I swayed, as though he were speaking of me. "No," replied the priest, who finally heard. "I had no time to read the papers this morning. I shall see them this evening. When I am busy like this all day, I tell my porter to keep my papers, and I read them on my return." "Bah," resumed the bailiff. "You must know this. The news of Paris. The news of this morning." I spoke. I think I know it. The bailiff looked at me. You? Indeed. In that case, what do you think of it? You are curious, I replied. And why, sir? Asked the bailiff. Everyone has his political opinion, and I esteem you too highly to think that you are without one. As for me, I am entirely of the opinion that the National Guard should be restored. I was sergeant of my company, and it was very pleasant. I interrupted him. I did not know that this was the news. And what is it then? You said you knew. I was referring to something else, in which Paris is interested today. The stupid fellow did not understand, and his curiosity was roused. Something else? Where in the devil could you learn any news? What is it, my dear sir? Do you know what it is, Monsieur Abbé? Are you better informed than I? Tell me, I beg you. What is this news? You know I love news. I tell it to the president, and it amuses him. And 1,000 idle stories they are, too, that he tells. He turned first to the priest and then to me, but I only shrugged my shoulders. Well, said he, of what are you thinking? I think, I answered, that I will not think any more this evening. Ah, yes, of course, he replied. But come, you are too sad. Monsieur Casting talked. Then, after a pause, I escorted Monsieur Papavoine. He wore his otter cap and smoked his cigar. As to the young fellows of La Rochelle, they talked only among themselves. But they talked. Another pause, then he continued, fools, enthusiasts. Apparently they scorn the whole world. But for what you have done, I find you very pensive, young man. Young man, I cried. I am older than you, and every 15 minutes makes me a year older besides. He turned, looked at me a moment in stupid wonder, and then began to laugh loudly. Come! You are jesting, you older than I. I might well be your grandfather. I am not jesting, I answered sadly. He opened his tobacco pouch. Here, my dear sir, do not be angry. Take a pinch of tobacco, and do not bear me ill will. Do not fear, I shall not have long to bear it. Just then his tobacco pouch, which he offered me, came in contact with the fire grating between us. A jolt of the carriage knocked it out of his hand, and it fell violently to the floor, at the gendarme's feet. Cursed grating! Cried the bailiff. He turned to me. Am I not unfortunate? All my tobacco is lost. I am losing more than you, I replied, smiling. He tried to gather up the tobacco, muttering between his teeth. More than I, that is easy to say. But no tobacco all the way to Paris. It's dreadful. The priest addressed a few consoling words to him, and perhaps I was dreaming, but it seemed as though it were the conclusion of the exhortation, the beginning of which I had heard. By degrees the conversation was carried on only between the priest and the bailiff. I let them talk on their side, and gave myself up to my own thoughts on mine. When we reached the city limits I was still preoccupied, no doubt, but Paris seemed noisier than ever. The carriage stopped a moment at the toll gate. The city custom house officers came out to examine it. Had I been a sheep or an ox going to slaughter, they would have had a purse of silver thrown them. But a human head does not pay for right of way, and we passed on. We crossed the boulevard, and the cabriolet went at a rapid rate through the old winding streets of the Faubourg Saint-Marceau and La Cite, which twine and intertwine one about the other like the 1,000 paths of an anthill. On the pavement of these narrow streets the noise of the wheels became so loud that all other sounds were lost. When I glanced through the little square hole, it seemed that the crowd of passers-by had stopped to watch the carriage, and that groups of children were running after it. It seemed, too, as though now and then I saw on the crosswalks a ragged man or woman, sometimes both together, with a bundle of printed papers in their hands, that the people were quarreling over, opening their mouths as though in the act of giving a loud cry. The palace clock struck 8:30 as we reached the courtyard of the conciergerie. The sight of the wide staircase, the black chapel, the sinister-looking entrances, froze me, and when the carriage came to a standstill, I thought the beating of my heart had stopped too. But I gathered myself together. The gate was opened like lightning. I jumped from the cell on wheels, and was hurried at rapid strides beneath the arch, between two lines of soldiers. Already a great crowd had collected about me. Chapter 23. As I walked along the public corridors of the Palais de Justice, I felt at my ease and almost free. But all my resolution left me when they opened the low doors, the secret staircases, and the close and dark inner corridors, where no one enters except the prisoners or those who convict them. The bailiff never left my side. The priest went away, to return in 2 hours. He had business to look after. They took me to the director's office, where the bailiff left me. It was an exchange. The director begged him to wait an instant, saying that he had some game to give him which he might take at once to Byseter on the return of the carriage. Probably it is the man who was condemned today, and who, this evening, will lie on the straw which I had not the time to use. Very well, said the bailiff to the director. I will wait a moment. We can make out both reports at the same time. That is a good plan. Meanwhile, I had been put into a small office opening out of that of the director. There I was left alone under lock and key. I do not know of what I was thinking, nor how long I was there, when all at once a rough and loud burst of laughter roused me from my stupor. I raised my eyes tremblingly. I was no longer alone in the cell. A man was there with me, a man about 55, of medium height, wrinkled, round-shouldered, grayish, and thick-set, with an evil look in his gray eyes, and a bitter smile on his lips. Dirty, ragged, and half-naked, he was altogether a most repulsive sight. The door must have opened, thrust him in, and closed again without my having noticed it. If only death might come in that way. For a few seconds we looked at each other, that man and I, he, with a laugh like a rattle, I, half amazed, half frightened. Who are you? I asked at length. You have the right to ask, he replied. I am a frioche. A frioche? What is that? The question seemed to augment his gaiety. That, he answered in the midst of a fresh burst of laughter. That means that the tall will play with my Sorbonne in 6 weeks, as he is about to play with your body in 6 hours. Ah! It seems that now you understand. I was white, my hair stood on end. He was the other convict, whom they were expecting at Byseter, my successor. He continued, What can you expect? I will tell you my story. I am the son of a good pager. It is a pity that Chariot, the hangman, took the trouble once to tie his cravat. It was when the gallows reigned, by the grace of God. At the age of 6, I had neither father nor mother. In the summer I rolled in the dust of the gutters, to see if someone would throw me a penny from the door of the stages. In the winter I went about in the mud with bare feet, blowing on my red fingers to keep them warm. My skin could be seen through my trousers. At the age of 9 I had begun to use my hands. Now and then I emptied a pocket or stole a cloak. At the age of 10 I was a pickpocket. Then I made some acquaintances. At 17 I was a thief. I forced open a shop by means of a false key. I was arrested. Being of age, I was sent to work in the galleys. It was hard there, sleeping on a plank, drinking nothing but water, eating black bread, dragging after me a stupid ball, which was of no use to anyone, and suffering from burns from a baton, and from the hot sun too. Besides all this, we were shaved, and I had such beautiful brown hair. Well, no matter. I served my time. 15 years pass. After a while, I was 32. One fine morning they gave me a ticket and 66 francs, which I had saved during the 15 years in the galleys by working 16 hours a day, 30 days a month, and 12 months a year. That was all right. I wanted to be an honest man with my 66 francs, and I had more beautiful ideas under my rags than there are under an abbé's cassock. But how the devils acted with that passport! It was yellow, and they had written on it Freed Galley. I had to show it everywhere, and present it every week before the mayor of the village where they compelled me to live. It was a fine recommendation. A galley! They were afraid of me. The children ran from me, and every door was shut in my face. No one would give me work. I devoured my 66 francs. I had to live. I showed that my arms were strong enough to work, but they shut their doors. I offered to do a day's labor for 15 sous, for 10, for 5. No. So what was there left for me to do? One day I was hungry. I knocked in a baker's case, seized some bread, and the baker seized me. I did not eat the bread, and I had the galleys for life, with 3 letters branded on my shoulders. You may see them if you wish. They call this act of justice the second offense. I was back again to the galleys. They took me to Toulon, this time with the life convicts. I had to escape. I had 3 walls to cut through, 2 chains to break, and 1 nail with which to do it, but I succeeded. They shot after me, for, like the cardinals at Rome, we were dressed in scarlet, and they shoot when we leave. Their powder went to the sparrows. This time I had no yellow passport, but no money either. I met some fellows who had served their turn or broken their chains. Their chief suggested that I join them. They committed murders on the great highways. I accepted his offer, and set about killing in order to live. Now it was a stagecoach, now a post-chaise, now a cattle dealer on horseback. We took the money, let the beast or the wagon go, and buried the man under a tree, being careful that his feet did not stick out. Then we danced on the spot, so that the earth would not look as though it had been freshly turned. I grew old in such pursuits, living in the brushwood, sleeping beneath the shining stars, and wandering from wood to wood, but at least I was free and my own master. Every one has some object in life. It may as well be one as another. But one starry night, the gendarmes seized us by our collars. My comrades escaped, but I, the eldest, was caught in the claws of these cats with their cockade hats. I was brought here. Already I had mounted every step of the ladder except one. To have stolen a handkerchief or murdered a man was all the same to me once. There remained but one more recitative to apply to me. I had only to reach the hangman. My trial was short. I was beginning to grow old, and to be of no further use. My father was hanged, and I am now about to enter the monastery of Mont de Regret, the guillotine. There, comrade. I was speechless at his story. He began to laugh louder than ever, and tried to take my hand, but I recoiled in horror. Friend, said he, you do not look brave. Do not be a coward in the face of death. It will be hard for a moment, when you reach the place to grieve, but it is so soon over with. I should like to be there to show you how to fall. 1,000 gods! I would rather not make another appeal. If they would cut me down with you, the same priest would serve us both. It is all the same to me to take your leavings. You see that I am a good fellow. Hey, will you accept my friendship? Again he started to approach me. Monsieur, I replied, pushing him away. I thank you. Fresh burst of laughter at my reply. Monsieur, you are a marquis. You are a marquis, I interrupted him. My friend, I have need to collect myself. Leave me. The serious tone in which I uttered the words sobered him at once. He nodded his grey and almost bald head, then imprinting his nails into his shaggy breast, which was bare under his open shirt, he murmured between his teeth. I understand, the priest, after a few moments' silence. Yes, he said, almost timidly. You are a marquis, that is good. But you have a fine cloak which will not be of much use to you. The tall will take it. Give it to me, I will sell it, and buy tobacco. I took off my cloak, and handed it to him. He began to clap his hands in childish glee. Then, seeing that I was in my shirt sleeves and shivering, he exclaimed, You are cold, sir, take this. It is raining, and you will get wet. Besides, one must look decent in the wagon. He removed his thick grey linen coat, and put my arms through it. I let him do so. Then I leaned against the wall. But I cannot tell what effect the man had on me. He began to examine the cloak which I had given him, crying out every second with joy. The pockets are perfectly new. The collar is not worn. I can get at least 15 francs for it. What luck! Tobacco enough for my 6 weeks. The door opened. They had come for both of us, to escort me to the room where the convicts awaited their turn, to take him to Bicêtre. He took his place, with a laugh, in the midst of the guard who was to lead him away, and said to the gendarmes, Do not be deceived. Monsieur and I have changed our coats, that is all, but do not mistake me for him. But the devil! That would not trouble me, now that I have something with which to get some tobacco. Chapter 24. The old criminal stole my cloak, for I did not give it to him, and he left me this ragged thing, this dirty coat. What do I look like? I did not let him take my cloak from my feeling of indifference or charity, no, but because he was stronger than I. Had I refused, he would have struck me with his great fists. Charity indeed! I was full of evil thoughts. I should have liked to strangle him with my hands, the old robber, and crush him beneath my feet. I feel that my heart is full of rage and bitterness. I think that the sack of hatred has burst. Death makes one wicked. Chapter 25. They took me to a cell where there were only the four walls, many bars across the window, and many locks at the door, all of which goes without saying. I asked for a table, a chair, and the necessary writing materials, all of which they brought me. Then I asked for a bed. The jailer looked at me in surprise as though to ask, "Of what use?" But they put up a cot in the corner. At the same time a gendarme was stationed in what they called my room. Were they afraid I would strangle myself with the mattress? Chapter 26. It is 10 o'clock. Oh, my poor little girl. Only 6 hours, and I shall be dead. I shall be an unclean something which is dragged over the cold table of the amphitheaters, a head that they will east on one side, a body that they will dissect on the other. Then what is left on one side they will put into a coffin and take to Clamart. This is what they are going to do with your father, these men who do not hate me, but who pity me, and who could save me. They want to kill me. Do you understand all this, Marie? Kill me in cold blood, systematically, for the good of the thing. Ah, my God! Poor little maid, your father who loved you so, your father who kissed your sweet little white neck, who ran his hand through your curls as through silk, who took your sweet, round face in his hands, who jumped you on his knees, and at night joined your little hands to pray to God. Who is there now who will do all this for you? Who is there to love you? All the children of your age will have fathers except you. How can you, my child, give up, on New Year's Day, the gifts, the pretty playthings, the candies and kisses? How can you, poor little orphan, give up drinking and eating? Oh, if the jury had only seen my little Marie, they would have understood that they must not kill the father of a baby 3 years old. And when she grows up, if she lives, what will become of her? Her father will be one of the souvenirs of the people of Paris. She will blush for me in my name. She will be scorned, repulsed, despised, on account of me, who loves her with my whole heart. Oh, my beloved little Marie! Is it really true that you will feel shame and horror for me? Miserable wretch! What a crime I have committed, and what a crime I am about to make society commit. Oh, is it really true that I am going to die before the close of the day? Is it really true that it is I? Yes, this dull sound of cries which I hear outside, this crowd of joyous people who are already running to the wharves, the gendarmes who are getting themselves ready in their barracks, the priest in his black gown, the other man with the red hands, it is all for me. It is I who am going to die. I, this very I who am here, who am living, moving, and breathing, who is seated at this table, which is like another table, and might be elsewhere. It is I, whom I touch and feel, and whose clothing makes these folds. Chapter 27. If only I knew how it was done, and in what way they died there. But it is horrible, because I do not know. The name of the thing is frightful, and I do not understand how I ever could have written or pronounced it. The combination of those 10 letters, their shape, their appearance, may well arouse a frightful idea. The physician of evil who invented the thing had a predestined name. The picture which this hideous word brings before me is vague, indistinct, and sinister. Every syllable is like a part of the machine. In my mind I build and overthrow the monstrous scaffold unceasingly. I dare not ask a question, but it is frightful not to know what it is, or how it works. It seems that there is a seesaw, and that you lie down on your stomach. Ah! My hair will turn white before my head falls. Chapter 28. But once I saw it. I was driving over the place to Grève one day, about 11 o'clock in the morning. All at once the carriage stopped. There was a crowd on the place. I put my head out of the window. Crowds filled La Grève and the wharf, and men, women, and children were standing on the parapet. Above the heads I saw a kind of platform of red wood that 3 men were erecting. A convict was to be executed that very day, and they were building the machine. I turned my head aside before I saw any more. Beside my carriage a woman said to a child, "See! Look! The knife works badly. They are going to oil the groove with candle grease." That is probably what they are doing today. 11 o'clock has just struck. No doubt they are oiling the groove. Ah, this time, wretch that I am, I shall not turn aside my head. Chapter 29. Oh, my pardon! My pardon! Perhaps they will pardon me. The king bears me no ill will. Let them find my lawyer. Quick, my lawyer! I want the galleys, 5 years in the galleys, and let it all end, or 20 years, or life with the crimson brand. But pardon for my life. A criminal can still walk, he can come and go, he can see the sun. Chapter 30. The priest has returned. He has white hair, a quiet manner, and a kind and gentle face. He is a good and charitable man. This morning I saw him empty his purse into the hands of the prisoners. How does it happen that his voice has nothing which may move or be moved? How does it happen that he has not told me anything which appealed to my heart or my mind? This morning my thoughts were wandering. I scarcely heard what he said to me, but his words seemed useless, and I was indifferent. They fell like the cold rain on that icy window. But when he came in just now, the sight of him did me good. Among all these men, he alone is still a man for me, I say to myself. And he gave me a great thirst for good and consoling words. We sat down, he on the chair, I on the bed. He said to me, "My son." This word opened my heart. He continued, "My son, do you believe in God?" "Yes, my father," I answered. "Do you believe in the Holy Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman Church?" "Yes," I replied. "My son," he continued, "you seem by your manner to doubt." Then he began to speak. He talked a long time. He used many words. When he thought he had finished, he rose and looked at me for the first time since the beginning of his discourse. "Well?" he asked. I declare that I listened to him first with eagerness, then with attention, then with devotion. I rose too. "Monsieur," I replied, "leave me alone, I beg." "When shall I return?" he asked. "I will let you know." Then he went out without a word, but shaking his head as though saying, "An unbeliever! But no, low as I may have fallen, I am not that. God is my witness that I believe in him." But what did the old man say to me? Nothing which roused any feeling, any tenderness, any tears, nothing from the soul, nothing which came straight from his heart into mine, nothing which came from him to me. On the contrary, something vague, indistinct, applicable to everything and everybody, emphatic where there was need for depth, dull where it should have been simple, a kind of sentimental sermon and theological elegy. Here and there a Latin quotation in Latin. Saint Augustine, Saint Gregory, what do I care about them? And then he seemed to be reciting a lesson which he had recited 20 times already, or of repeating a theme which was almost worn out from having been so long in his mind. There was no expression in his eyes, no feeling in his voice, no meaning in his gestures. Yet how could it be otherwise? This priest is the official chaplain of the prison. His mission is to console and exhort, and he lives on this. The galleys, the victims, are the resource of his eloquence. He confesses and attends them, because he has his position to fill. He has grown old in leading men to death. For a long time he has been accustomed to that before which others tremble. His locks, well powdered with white, no longer stand on end. The galleys and the scaffold are everyday affairs for him. He is blasé. Probably he has his copybook, such a page for the galleys, such a page for the convict condemned to die. He is told the evening before that there will be someone for him to console at such an hour the next day. He asks who it is, galley or convict, and rereads the page. Then he makes his visit. In this way it happens that those who are bound for Toulon, and those who are to go to La Grève are common ground for him, and he for them. Oh, if instead of all this they would send me some young vicar, or an old curate in charge of his first parish. If they would go to him in the corner of his fireplace, where he is reading his book and expecting nothing, and say to him, "There is a man who is about to die, and you are the one who must console him. You must be there when they bind his hands, when they cut off his hair. You must enter the wagon with him, and with your crucifix hide the hangman from him. You must be jostled with him over the pavement to La Greve. You must go with him through the horrible crowd, drunk with blood. You must embrace him at the foot of the scaffold. You must stay there until his head is severed from his body. And when they brought him to me, trembling and shivering from head to foot, I would throw myself into his arms, and at his feet, and he would cry, and we would cry together, and he would grow eloquent, and I would be consoled. My heart would unburden itself against his, and he would take my soul, and I would take his God. But this good old man, what is he to me, or I to him? An unhappy individual, a shadow, like many another he has already seen, a unit to add to the number of executions. Perhaps I am wrong thus to repel him. It is he who is good, and I who am bad. Alas! It is not my fault. It is the atmosphere of the prison which spoils and kills everything. They have just brought me some food. They thought that I must be in need of it. The tray is neat and dainty, and there is a chicken, I think, besides other things. Well, I tried to eat, but at the first bite everything fell from my mouth. It tasted so bitter and nauseating. Chapter 31. A man just came in, with his hat on his head, but he scarcely noticed me. He opened a footrule, and began to measure the height of the stones in the wall, speaking in a very loud voice, and saying, "That is right," or, "That is not right." I asked the gendarme who he was. It seems that he is an under-architect employed in the prison. On his part, his curiosity was aroused concerning me. He exchanged a few words in a low tone with the jailers who accompanied him, looked at me an instant, shook his head carelessly, and returned to his measuring, speaking in a loud voice. His duty finished, he approached me, saying in his loud tones, "My good friend, in 6 months this prison will be greatly improved." And his gestures seemed to add, "You will not enjoy it, what a pity!" He almost smiled. I thought he was going to tease me, as one might tease a young bride on her wedding night. My gendarme, an old soldier with chevrons, replied for me, "Monsieur, we do not speak so loud in a death chamber." The architect went away, and I was left there, like one of the stones he had measured. Chapter 32. Then a funny thing happened. They had taken away my kind old gendarme, whom I had not even shaken by the hand, ungrateful egoist that I am. Another took his place, a man with a low brow, eyes like a cow's, and a stupid face. I paid no attention to him, but sat before the table with my back to the door. I was trying to cool my brow with my hand, for I was troubled in mind. A light touch on my shoulder made me turn. It was the new gendarme, who was alone with me. This is somewhat the way in which he addressed me. "Criminal, have you a kind heart?" "No," I replied. The brusqueness of my answer seemed to disconcert him. But he continued hesitatingly, "One is not bad for the pleasure of being so." "And why not?" I asked. "If you have nothing else to say to me, leave me." "What are you aiming at?" "I beg pardon, my criminal," he replied. "Just 2 words. These, if you could make a poor man happy, without its costing you anything, would you not do so?" I shrugged my shoulders. "Do you come from Charenton? You choose a strange vase from which to draw happiness." "I make anyone happy." He lowered his voice, and assumed an air of mystery, which was not in keeping with his stupid face. "Yes, criminal, happy and lucky. You can make me all this. Listen. I am a poor gendarme. My duties are heavy, my pay is small, my horse is my own, and is the ruin of me. But to offset this I take shares in the lottery. One must have some business. Until now I have needed nothing in order to win except lucky numbers. I look everywhere for sure ones, but I always fall to one side. I play 76, it draws 77. In vain have I kept them, they do not come. A little patience, please, I am almost through, but here is a lucky chance for me. It seems, pardon me, criminal, that you are to die today. It is a well-known fact that these who die in this way see the lottery in advance. Promise me to come tomorrow evening, what difference will it make to you, and give me 3 numbers, 3 good ones. Hey! I am not afraid of ghosts, you may be sure. This is my address, Caserne Popincourt, staircase A, number 26, at the end of the corridor. You will recognize me, won't you? Come even this evening, if it is more convenient for you." I would have scorned answering him, the imbecile, if a mad hope had not crossed my mind. In such a desperate position, one occasionally imagines that a chain can be broken by a thread. "Listen," I said, acting the comedian as much as is possible when one is about to die. "I will make you richer than the king, so that you can win millions, on one condition." He opened his stupid eyes. "What condition?" "What? Anything to please you, my criminal. Instead of 3 numbers, I promise you 4. Change clothes with me." "If that is all," he cried, unhooking the top hooks of his uniform. I rose from my chair. I watched his every movement with a beating heart. Already I saw the doors opening before the gendarme's uniform, and the place, the street, and the Palais of Justice behind me. But he turned with an undecided air. "Ah, is this in order that you may escape?" Then I knew that all was lost, yet I tried a last resort, which was foolish and useless. "Yes," I replied. "But your fortune is made," he interrupted. "Well, no! Not so fast. You must be dead for my numbers to be lucky ones." I sat down mute, in greater despair than ever, after the hope I had had. Chapter 33. I closed my eyes and raised my hands, trying to forget the present in the past. As I dreamed, thoughts of my childhood and early manhood came back to me one by one, sweet, calm, and smiling, like islands of flowers, across the gulf of black and confused thoughts which were seething in my brain. I was a child again, a merry, laughing schoolboy, playing, running, and shouting with my brothers in the great green paths of the wild garden where I passed my early years, in an old yard belonging to a convent, over which towered the dark dome of the Val de Grace. And then 4 years later, a child still, but dreamy and passionate, there was a young girl in the lonely garden. Peppa, a little Spanish maid of 14, with great eyes, thick hair, a golden brown skin, and red lips and rosy cheeks. Our mothers told us to go and run together, but we walked. They told us to play, but we talked, children of the same age, but of different sex. There was only 1 year left for us to run and quarrel together. I argued with Pepita over the most beautiful apple on the tree. I struck her for a bird's nest. She cried, I said. "That served you right." And we went to our mothers with our complaints, and they told us aloud that we were in the wrong, but whispered aside to us that we were right. Later she is leaning on my arm, and I am proud and happy. We walk slowly, and speak in low tones. She drops her handkerchief. I pick it up for her. Our trembling hands touch. She tells me about the little birds, about the star which is visible beyond, about the crimson sun setting behind the trees, or about her schoolmates, her dress, and her ribbons. We make innocent remarks, and both of us blush. The little maid has grown into a young woman. That evening, it was summer. We were under the chestnut trees, at the end of the garden. After one of those long pauses with which our conversation abounded, she dropped my arm, exclaiming, "Let us run!" I can see her now. She was in black, in mourning for her grandmother. This childish idea had entered her head. Peppa was Pepita again, as she cried, "Let us run!" She started ahead of me, her slender waist like a wasp's, and her flying skirts showing her little feet above the ankles. I sped after her. Now and then the wind raised her black tippet, and I saw her soft brown neck. I was beside myself. At last I caught her near an old ruined well. I seized her by the waist, by right of conquest, and made her sit down on a grassy knoll. She did not resist. She was out of breath, and smiling. I was serious, and I watched her black eyes behind her dark lashes. "Sit here," she said to me. "It is still daylight. Let us read something. Have you a book?" I had with me the second volume of the Voyages of Spallanzani. I opened it at random, and I drew nearer to her. She leaned her shoulder against mine, and we began to read to ourselves. Before turning a page she always had to wait for me. My mind acted less quickly than hers. "Have you finished?" she would ask when I had scarcely begun. Our heads touched each other, and our hair. We felt each other's breath little by little, and finally our lips met. When we turned back to our reading, the sky was full of stars. "Oh, Mama, Mama," cried she, as we reached home. "If you only knew how we have run!" I was silent. "You say nothing," said my mother. You look sad. But my heart was a paradise. That was an evening I shall remember all my life. All my life. Chapter 34. Some hour has just struck, but I know not which one. I can scarcely hear the striking of the clock. I feel as though the noise of an organ were in my ears. But these are my last thoughts which make such a hum. At this supreme moment, when I am lost in these remembrances, I recall my crime with horror, and I want to repent still more. I felt greater remorse before I was condemned. Since then it seems as though there was no time for anything but thoughts of death. But I should like to repent. When I consider for a moment what my life has been, when I think of the axe which is about to end it all, I shiver as though it were a new thing to me. My beautiful childhood, my happy youth. A golden cloth, the end of which is bloody. Between then and now, runs a river of blood, another's blood and mine. If some day my story should be known, no one, after reading of so many years of innocent happiness, will wish to think of this dreadful year, which began by a crime, and ended in an execution. It will appear odd and out of place. And yet, oh, wretched laws and wretched men, I was not wicked. Oh, to have to die in a few hours, and to think that a year ago, on a day like this, I was free and innocent, taking my autumn stroll, wandering under the trees, and walking among the leaves. Chapter 35. Even at this very moment there are about me, in the homes around the Palais and La Grève, everywhere throughout Paris, men coming and going, talking and laughing, men reading the papers, and thinking of their business, merchants making bargains, young girls planning their ball gowns for this evening, mothers playing with their children. Chapter 36. I remember one day when I was a child I went to see the great bell of Notre Dame. I was already dizzy from having climbed the dark, winding staircase, and crossed the frail gallery which connects the two towers whence I saw Paris at my feet, when I entered the cage of stone and wood where the bell hangs, with its tongue which weighs an hundredweight. I advanced tremblingly across the poorly joined planks, looking over at the clock which is so famous among the children and the people of Paris, and realizing, not without some fright, that the slate box about it, with its sloping sides, was on a level with my feet. Every now and then I saw, as the crow flies, so to speak, the place of Parvis, Notre Dame, and the people who seemed like ants. All at once the great bell began to strike. A deep vibration filled the air, making the heavy tower sway. The beams of the floor trembled. The sound almost threw me over. I swayed, and barely escaped falling down the sloping sides of the slate box. In terror I lay down on the beams, grasping them tight with both hands, without speaking, without breathing, with that dreadful noise in my ears, and under my eyes that precipice, that place far below me, where so many peaceful, enviable people were passing. Well, it seems as if I were still in that bell tower. Everything is indistinct and blurred. Something like the noise of a bell shakes the cavities of my brain, and around me I see the calm, tranquil life I have left, which other men are still living, but I see it only from afar, and across the depths of an abyss. Chapter 37. The Hôtel de Ville is an evil-looking building. It is on a footing with La Grève, with its narrow, pointed roof, its strange belfry, its great white dial, its rows of small columns, its 1,000 windows, its worn staircases, its 2 arches on the right and left. Somber and sad it stands, its face wasted away with years, and so dirty that even in the sunlight it is black. On execution days it emits gendarmes from all its doors, and it watches the condemned man with all its windows. In the evening its dial, which marked the fatal hour, still shines out upon its dark facade. Chapter 38. It is 1:15. This is how I feel. I have a violent pain in my head, my back is cold, my forehead burns. Every time I rise or lean over, it seems as though there were a liquid in my brain which makes it knock against the sides of my head. I tremble convulsively, and now and then the pen falls from my hand as though by a galvanic action. My eyes smart as though I were in the midst of smoke. My elbows ache. But only 2 hours and 45 minutes are left before I shall be well again. Chapter 39. They say that it is nothing, that one does not suffer, that it is an easy, simple death. But what is this agony for 6 weeks, and this rattle for 12 whole hours? What is the anguish of this irreparable day which is passing so slowly and yet so quickly? What is this ladder of torture leading to the scaffold? Is all this nothing? Apparently this is not suffering. Is it not the same sensation when the blood wastes away drop by drop as when the mind exhausts itself thought by thought? Then are they sure that we do not suffer? Who has told them so? Has it ever happened that a bloody head has raised up on the edge of the scaffold and cried out to the people, "That did not hurt"? Has anyone who was killed in this way returned to thank them and say, "That is a good invention, do not give it up. The machine is fine"? Did Robespierre? Did Louis XVI? No. But it is nothing, they say. In less than a minute, in less than a second, it is over. But have they ever put themselves, even in thought, in the place of the one who is there, when the heavy axe falls, tearing the flesh, breaking the nerves, cutting the vertebrae? Ah! Only half a second, the pain is over. Oh, horrors! Chapter 40. It is strange that I am constantly thinking of the king. In vain have I tried not to, in vain have I shaken my head. There is a voice in my ear which says constantly, "In this same city, at this very hour, and not far from here, there is, in another palace, a man who also has guards at every door, a man like you, individual among the people, with this difference, that he is as high as you are low. His whole life, minute by minute, is but glory, grandeur, delight, intoxication. Everything about him is love, respect, veneration. The loudest voices become low when he is addressed, and the proudest brows humble. Beneath his eyes all is silk and gold. At this very moment he is holding a council of ministers where every one is of his opinion. Or he is thinking of tomorrow's hunt, of this evening's ball, sure that the fate will come, and leaving to others to plan his pleasures. Well, this man is flesh and blood like you, and in order, at this very instant, for the horrible scaffold to crumble, and all be restored to you, life, liberty, fortune, family, he need only write with this pen the 7 letters of his name, at the bottom of a slip of paper. Or it needs but his coach to meet your wagon, and he is good, and would ask for nothing better, perhaps, and yet none of this happens. Chapter 41. Very well, then. Let us be brave with death. Let us take hold of this horrible idea with our 2 hands, and look at it full in the face. Let us ask it what it is. Let us know what it demands of us. Let us turn it over on every side, and spell out the enigma. Let us look at the tomb in advance. It seems to me that as soon as my eyes shall have closed, I shall see a great illumination, and abysses of light where my spirit shall roll forever. It seems to me that the sky will be lighted by itself, that the stars will be dark spots there, and that, instead of being as they are now to our living eyes, spangles of gold on black velvet, they will seem black points on a gold cloth. Or, poor wretch that I am, it will perhaps be a hideous and deep whirlpool, the sides of which are lined with shadows, and into which I shall fall forever, seeing other forms moving about in the darkness. Or, waking after the blow, I shall perhaps find myself on a flat, damp surface, crawling through the darkness, and turning over and over like a rolling head. It seems to me that there will be a great wind which will drive me on, and that I shall be hurled here and there by other rolling heads. At intervals there will be seas and streams of a dry and unknown liquid. Everything will be black. When my eyes in their rotation shall turn upwards, they will see only a sky of blackness, the thickness of which will weigh down upon them, and far away at the end will rise great arches of smoke, blacker than the shadows. They will also see, flying in the night, small crimson sparks, which, on coming near, will become birds of fire. And it will be like this through all eternity. It may be also that at certain times the dead of La Greve will gather together in the black nights of winter on the place which belongs to them. It will be a pale and bloody crowd, and I shall not be wanting. There will be no moon, and they will speak in low tones. The Hotel de Ville will be there, with its worm-eaten facade, its fallen roof, and its dial which has been pitiless alike to all. There will be on the place a guillotine from hell, and the devil will execute a hangman. This will be at 4 o'clock in the morning. Then it will be our turn to gather around in crowds. It is probable that it will be like this. But if these dead return, under what form will they come? What part of their incomplete and mutilated body will they keep? Which will they choose? Will the head or the body be the ghost? Alas! What does death do with our soul? What nature does it give it? What does it take, and what does it leave with it? Where does it put it? Will it sometimes lend it eyes of flesh with which to look down upon the earth and weep? Ah, for a priest who knows all this. I want a priest, and a crucifix to kiss. My God! It is always the same. Chapter 42. I begged them to let me sleep, and I threw myself on the bed. I had a clot of blood in my head, which made me sleep. It is my last sleep of this kind. I had a dream. I dreamed that it was night. It seemed that I was in my office with 2 or 3 of my friends, whom I do not remember. My wife was in the adjoining bedroom, asleep with her child. We were talking in a low voice, and what we said seemed to frighten us. Suddenly I heard a noise somewhere in the other rooms of the house. A faint, strange, indistinct noise. My friends heard it too. We listened. It sounded like a lock opening stealthily, like the noise coming from the sawing of a bolt. There was something in the air which froze us. We were afraid. We thought perhaps robbers had entered my house at this late hour of the night. We decided to go and see. I rose and took the candle. My friends followed, one after the other. We crossed the adjoining bedroom. My wife was sleeping with her child. We reached the drawing room. There was nothing there. The portraits hung motionless in their gold frames against the crimson wall. It seemed to me that the door from the drawing room into the dining room was not in its usual place. We entered the dining room and walked around it. I went first. The door from the stairway was tightly closed, as well as were the windows. Near the stove I saw that the linen closet was open, and that the door of this closet was drawn out, as though to hide the wall behind it. This surprised me. We thought that someone was behind the door. I raised my hand to close it, but could not. Startled, I pulled harder, when suddenly it yielded, and we saw a little old woman, her hands hanging down and her eyes closed, standing motionless, as though caught in the corner of the wall. There was something hideous about it all, and my hair stands on end when I think of it. "What are you doing there?" I asked the old woman. No answer. "Who are you?" I asked again. She neither spoke nor moved, but stood with closed eyes. My friends said, "Probably she is in league with those who have entered with evil intentions. They escaped when they heard us coming. She could not and hid here." I questioned her again, but she remained speechless, motionless, sightless. One of us gave her a push. She fell forward. She fell like a block of wood, like a dead thing. We pushed her with our feet, then 2 of us raised her, and stood her up against the wall again. Still she gave no sign of life. We shouted in her ear, but she was as dumb as though she were deaf. We were losing patience, and there was anger in our terror. One of the men said to me, "Put the candle under her chin." I did so. She half opened one eye, an empty socket, dull, frightful looking, which could not see. I removed the lighted wick, saying, "Ah, at last! Now answer, you old sorcerer! Who are you?" The eye closed, unresponsive like herself. "Well, this is too much," cried the others. "The candle again! The candle! We'll make her speak!" Again I placed the light under the old woman's chin. She opened both eyes slowly, looked first at one, then at another of us, and suddenly leaning forward, she blew out the candle with an icy breath. At the same time I felt 3 sharp teeth clutch my hand in the darkness. I awoke, trembling, covered with a cold perspiration. The kind priest was sitting at the foot of my bed, reading prayers. "Have I slept long?" I asked. "My son," he said, "you have slept 1 hour. They have brought your child here. She is waiting for you in the next room. I did not wish them to waken you." "Oh," I cried. "My daughter! Tell them to bring her to me, my little girl." Chapter 43. She is fresh and rosy, and has big eyes. She is beautiful. They had put on a pretty dress, which was very becoming to her. I took her, I raised her in my arms, I seated her on my knee, I kissed her hair. Why had her mother not come with her? Her mother is ill, and her grandmother too. That is well. She looked at me in a surprised sort of way. She let herself be petted and fondled, and covered with kisses, but every now and then she threw an anxious look toward her nurse, who was crying in the corner. At length I spoke. Marie! I cried. My little Marie! I caught her violently to my heart, choking with sobs. She gave a little cry. Oh, you hurt me, sir! Sir! The poor child had not seen me for a year. She had forgotten me, my face, my words, my voice. Alas! Who, indeed, would recognize me with this beard, these clothes, and this pallor? What? Already forgotten by the only one whom I wanted to remember me? What? No longer a father, even now. To be condemned never again to hear the word in the language of children, which is so gentle that it cannot belong to that of men. Papa! To hear those lips speak it once more, just once more, this is all I would have asked for the 40 years of life that they are taking from me. Listen, Marie, I said, taking her 2 little hands in mine. Do you not know me any more? She looked at me with her sweet eyes and answered, No. Look well, I said again. What? Do you not know who I am? Yes, she said. You are a gentleman. Alas! To love only one being in all the world, to love her with all one's love, and to have her before you, seeing you and looking at you, speaking to you, and answering you, and not knowing you, to want consolation only from her, the only one who does not know that you need it, and because you are about to die. Marie, I asked, have you a papa? Yes, sir, the child answered. Well, where is he? She raised her great eyes in astonishment. Ah, don't you know? He is dead. Then she began to cry. I almost let her fall from my knee. Dead? I exclaimed. Marie, do you know what it is to be dead? Yes, sir, she replied. He is in the earth and in heaven too. She went on of her own accord. I prayed to the good God for him night and morning, on Mama's knee. I kissed her forehead. Marie, say your prayer for me. I cannot say it now, sir. A prayer is not made in the daytime. Come this evening to my house, and I will say it for you. This was enough. I interrupted her. Marie, I am your papa. Oh, she exclaimed. I added, do you want me for your papa? The child turned away. No, my papa was much more beautiful. I covered her with tears and kisses. She tried to disengage herself from my arms, crying, Your beard hurts me. I sat her again on my knees, devouring her with my eyes, and then I questioned her. Marie, do you know how to read? Yes, she replied. I can read very well. Mama makes me read my letters. Well, let us hear you read a little, I said, pointing to a paper, which she was crumpling in one of her baby hands. She nodded her pretty head. Well, I can read only fables. Never mind, try. Come, read. She unfolded the paper, and began to spell out with her finger. A-R-A-R-R-E-Z ret eret. I snatched it from her hands. It was my death sentence that she was reading to me. Her nurse had bought the paper for us so. It cost me more than that. Words cannot express what I felt. My violence frightened her. She was almost in tears. All at once she said to me, Give me my paper, it is to play with. I handed her back to her nurse. Take her away, I cried, and I fell back in my chair, sad, lonely, despairing. They may come now, I care for nothing more. The last chord of my heart is broken. I am ready for whatever they want to do with me. Chapter 44. The priest is good, and the jailer also. I think that they dropped a tear when I said that they might take away my child. They have done so. Now I must harden myself, and think with firmness upon the hangman, the wagon, the gendarmes, the crowd on the bridge, on the wharf, at the windows, and that which is waiting expressly for me on that gloomy place to grieve, which might well be paved with the heads it has seen fall. I believe that I still have an hour in which to grow accustomed to all this. Chapter 45. All the populace will laugh, and will clap their hands and shout, and among all these men who are free and unknown to the jailers, who run joyfully to an execution, in this crowd of heads which will cover the place, there will be more than one which sooner or later will follow mine into the crimson basket. More than one who comes there for me will some day come for himself. For these fatal beings there is, on a certain spot of La Greve, a fatal place, a center of attraction, a trap. They turn around until they finally reach it. Chapter 46. My little Marie. They carried her away to play. She watched the crowd from the cab window, but thought no more of the gentleman. Perhaps I still have time to write a few pages for her, that some day she may read them, and 15 years from now may, perhaps, weep at today. Yes, she must know my story from me, and why the name I leave her is Bloody. Chapter 47. My story editor's note. The pages attached to this cannot be found. Perhaps, as those which follow would indicate, the condemned man did not have the time to write them. It was late when the thought occurred to him. Chapter 48. A room in the Hotel de Ville d'Ille. So I am here. The wretched journey is over. The place is not far away, and under the window the horrible crowd is gathering, the crowd which longs and waits and laughs. I have hardened myself in vain, I have trembled in vain, it is always the same, my heart still fails me. When, above the heads, I saw those two great crimson arms, with the black triangle at one end, standing between the two lanterns on the quay, my heart failed me. I asked to be allowed to make a final declaration. They brought me here, and they have gone for a public prosecutor. I am now waiting for him. It is so much time gained. Here he is. 3 o'clock struck, and they came to tell me that it was time. I trembled, as though I had been thinking of anything else for 5 whole hours, for 6 weeks, 6 months. It affected me as though it were something unexpected. They made me cross corridors and descend stairways. They brought me between 2 jailers to a gloomy, narrow, arched room on the ground floor, that would be almost dark on a rainy, foggy day. A chair stood in the center. They told me to be seated. I obeyed. Near the door and along the walls several men were standing, besides the priest and the gendarmes, and there were 3 other men also. The first, the largest and oldest, was fat, with a red face. He wore a cloak and a 3-cornered hat. It was he, the hangman, the valet of the guillotine. The other 2 were his valets. Scarcely was I seated, before the other 2 came up behind me like cats. Then all at once I felt a cold steel run through my hair, and scissors touching my ears. My hair was cut off, and its locks fell on my shoulders. The man with the 3-cornered hat touched them gently with his rough hand. Around me they were all talking in low tones. Outside there was a great noise, like a mighty roaring. At first I thought it was the river, but from the laughter which burst out, I knew it was the people. A young man near the window was writing in a copybook, and asked one of the jailers what they called that which they were doing. The toilet of the condemned man, the other replied. I knew that it would all be described in tomorrow's paper. Then one of the valets removed my jacket, and the other took my 2 hands, which were hanging down, and tied them behind me with a rope, which they knotted around my wrists. At the same time the other took off my cravat. My cambric shirt, the only article which remained of my former life, made him hesitate a moment, then he began to cut away the collar. At this dread precaution, at the touch of the steel on my neck, my elbows shook, and I gave a stifled groan. The hand of the executioner trembled. Monsieur, said he, pardon me. Did I hurt you? These hangmen are very gentle. The shouts of the people outside grew louder. The fat man with the pimpled face handed me a handkerchief to smell of which was saturated with vinegar. Thanks, no, I said in as strong a voice as I could command. I do not need it, I am very well. Then one of the men knelt down, and bound my feet by means of a fine, narrow rope, which allowed me to take only short steps. The rope was attached to that which bound my hands. The fat man threw my jacket over my back, and tied the sleeves under my chin. All that was to be done there was finished. The priest approached with his crucifix. Come, my son, said he. The valets took hold of my arms. I rose and walked, but my steps were weak and trembling, as though each leg had 2 knees. The outside door was now flung open. The furious shouting, the cold air, and the white light fell on me as I stood in the darkness. At the farther end of the dull prison I saw all at once, through the rain, the 1,000 howling heads of the populace, crowding pell-mell upon the wide steps of the Palais. On the right, on a level with the threshold, was a line of horses belonging to the gendarmes, of which only the front feet and the breasts could be seen from the lower door. In front, a company of soldiers was drawn up in line of battle. On the left, I saw the rear of a wagon, against which a steep ladder was leaning. It was a hideous picture, well framed in the door of a prison. It was for that awful moment that I had been gathering all my strength. I took 3 steps and stood on the threshold of the prison. "There he is! There he is!" cried the people. "He is coming out at last!" And those nearest to me began to clap their hands. If they loved the king very much, it would be less of a holiday. It was an ordinary wagon, with a worn-out horse, and the driver wore a blue smock frock, with red figures on it like those of the gardeners in the suburbs of Bicester. The fat man with the 3-cornered hat was the first to mount. "Good morning, Monsieur Sanson!" cried the children on the railings. A valet followed him. "Hooray, Marty!" cried the children again. Both sat down on the front bench. It was my turn next. I stepped up with a firm tread. "He walks well," said a woman by the side of the gendarmes. This cruel praise gave me courage. The priest took a seat opposite me. They had put me on the rear seat, with my back to the horse. I shuddered at this last attention. After all, they have some feeling in them. I looked around me. Gendarmes before, gendarmes behind, then the people, the people, the people. A sea of heads on the place. A picket of mounted gendarmes awaited us at the gate of the Palais. The officer gave the order. The wagon and its procession began to move, as though pushed forward by a howl from the people. We passed through the entrance, and as the wagon turned toward the Pont au Change, the place burst out into a cry which echoed from the pavement to the roofs, and the bridges and the quays answered it with the noise of an earthquake. At this point the picket joined our escort. "Hats off! Hats off!" cried 1,000 voices together. "As for the king!" I gave a frightful laugh, and exclaimed to the priest, Their hats, I, my head." The horses walked. The quay was sweet with the odor of plants. It was flower market day, but the women had deserted their posies for me. Opposite, in front of the square tower which rises at the corner of the Palais, were wine shops, the doorways of which were filled with spectators, especially women, who were rejoicing over their fine places. The day ought to be a good one for the tavern keepers. They were renting tables, chairs, scaffolds, wagons. Everything was crowded with spectators. Merchants of human blood were crying out with all their might, "Who wants a place?" I was filled with rage against all these people, and I longed to shout out, "Who wants mine?" The wagon moved on. At every step the crowd surged up after it, and it was with fright that I saw more crowds gathering in the distance at other points of my journey. As we crossed the Pont au Change, I chanced to look back on my right. My eyes fell on the other quay, above the houses, and on a solitary black tower, covered with carved images, on the top of which I saw 2 stone monsters sitting sidewise. I do not know why I asked the priest the name of the tower, but I did. "Saint Jacques la Boucherie," the hangman answered. I cannot explain how it was, but nothing escaped me in the mist, in spite of the fine white rain which glistened upon everything like the network of a spider's web. Every detail suggested some horror to me. Words fail me to describe my feelings. Toward the middle of the wide Pont au Change the crowd grew so dense that we could scarcely pass, and I was seized with a violent terror. I thought, final vanity, that I should faint. Then I strove to become deaf and blind and dead to everything except the priest, whose words I could scarcely hear, owing to the shouts of the people. I took the crucifix and kissed it. "Pity me, oh my God!" I cried, and I tried to lose myself in this thought. But every jolt of the hard wagon shook me. Then all at once I became violently cold. The rain had soaked my clothes and dampened my shaved head. "You are shaking with the cold, my son," said the priest. "Yes," I replied. Alas! Alas, it was not only from the cold. At a turn in the bridge, the women expressed pity at my youth. When we reached the fatal quay, I was beginning to see and hear nothing. The voices, the heads at the windows, at the doors, at the shop railings, on the arms of the lanterns, the open-eyed and cruel spectators, the people who knew me, and not one of whom I knew, the paved street lined with human faces, I was unconscious of them all. I was dazed and blind. It is a dreadful thing to have the weight of so many eyes bearing down upon one. I swayed on my bench, paying no more attention even to the priest or the crucifix. In the tumult about me, I no longer could distinguish the cries of pity from those of joy, the jeers from the sympathy, the voices from the noise. It was all a roar in my head like an echo striking on brass. I mechanically spelled out the signs on the shops. Once a strange curiosity made me turn my head to see what was in front of us. It was a last effort of my mind, but the body refused to obey. My neck was paralyzed as though already dead. I saw on my left, beyond the river, one of the towers of Notre Dame, which seen from that point hides the other. It was the one on which floated the flag. There were crowds of people there, and they must have had a good view. The wagon went on and on, the shops passed by, one sign followed another, written, painted, and gilded, and the people shouted and stamped in the mud, and I let myself be carried on as are those in sleep by their dreams. Suddenly the line of shops ended in a place. The shouts of the populace became louder, shriller, more joyful than ever. The wagon stopped, and I almost fell forward on the floor. The priest caught me. "Courage!" he whispered. A ladder was placed at the rear of the wagon. He gave me his arm. I descended, took one step, was about to take a second, when strength failed me. Between the two lanterns on the quay, I had seen a terrible object. Oh, it was the real thing. I stood still, swaying back and forth. "I have a last declaration to make," I cried in a weak voice, "and they brought me here. I asked to be allowed to write my last wishes. They unbound my hands, but the rope is here, waiting, and the rest is below." Chapter 49. A judge, a commissary, a magistrate of some kind, has just come in. I implored him with clasped hands to obtain my pardon, dragging myself across the floor on my knees. He asked me with a fatal smile if that was all I had to say to him. "My pardon! My pardon!" I cried. "Or, in mercy, 5 minutes longer. Who knows? Perhaps it will come. It is so horrible to die thus at my age." One often hears of a pardon coming at the last moment. And whose pardon would it be, sir, except mine? The accursed hangman! He approached the judge to tell him that the execution had been arranged for a certain time, that the moment was almost at hand, that he was held responsible, and that, besides this, it was raining, and that the machine ran the risk of becoming rusty. "Oh, in mercy! Wait one moment for my pardon, or I will defend myself. I'll bite." The judge and the hangman went away. I am alone. Alone with 2 gendarmes. Oh, the horrible crowd with their hyena-like yells. Who knows if I may not escape, if I may not yet be saved. If my pardon, it is not possible for them not to pardon me. Ah, the fiends! I seem to hear them coming up the stairs. And